Well, it's the last weekend of April in Colorado, and guess what? On a weekend, once again, it's snowing. So if you're a CVO owner and you've been working on your bike or just hanging out with it in the garage, you may hear this faint ticking sound, and you can't figure out where it's coming from. Well, as it turns out, it's coming from the right side cover of the bike. So I had a viewer reach out to me who's done a little more investigation about this ticking sound, and he discovered it's coming from the relays underneath the ABS module. And it turns out these two relays have to do with the power locks on the saddlebags. So we have the locking relay and the unlocking relay. And it's actually the locking relay that is ticking. You can actually feel it ticking in there. So a couple observations with this ticking sound coming from the relays. It never shuts off. You can let the bike sit on a tender, off a tender, with the key fob present or the key fob not present, and they will continue to tick. So there's always a charge to these relays. And what they're designed for is so that when you use your remote, you can lock and unlock your bags. But for whatever reason, the BCM is keeping a charge to these relays. And relays are designed that when power is present, it pulls the contact to the coil and allows the power to flow through. And then when there's no power present, it will let go of that contact and no power pulls through. But when you have a relay that is ticking, it's just continually engaging that magnetic pulse. So it's pulling the contact in and letting go, pulling in and letting go. And that's what the ticking sound is. And that is usually caused when a relay has a little bit of power present, but not enough power to keep that contact closed. So what we're seeing is there's a small charge to these relays at all times coming from the BCM. So the bus continually has power present, but it's not enough power to actually close the contact. So it's just contacting, letting go, contacting, letting go, and there's not enough power there to actually close the contact. Until you tell the BCM to lock or unlock, then it sends the full power to the relay and makes that contact to activate the mechanism. So why are these live all the time? Well, I'm really not sure. So we know the security system is always powered. So it's always drawing some voltage from the battery. And the antenna is right here. So it's looking for a key fob to be present or to have a command come from the key fob. So I would assume that the BCM would sense me pushing the lock or unlock button and then send power to the relays and turn them on to either lock or unlock. But for whatever reason, with the power going to the security system, it's also providing a little power to the unlock and lock relays, causing them to connect and disconnect, generating that clicking sound. So the concern would be how much amperage is being drawn by the security system and what additional amperage is being caused by those lock and unlock relays. And is that causing what's considered a parasitic draw? So as the bike sits, is it draining enough power from the battery that it'll go dead on you? And if you have a severe parasitic draw, your bike battery can drain quickly. So even overnight, the next morning, you won't be able to start the bike. So we know these bikes have been in the wild for almost a year now, and there's no big complaints of the battery completely draining on people. And some people are using tenders and some are not, but I suspect many are using tenders. So what if you went on a long multi-day road trip and your bike was going to be off a tender for many days? Would the battery drain to the point that it wouldn't start? And is there a parasitic draw? So how much amperage is being used by this system? Well, I think that's something we can actually measure. Let's take a look. So in the service manual, they actually tell you how to perform a parasitic draw test. So it's funny here, they talk about never wiring an accessory directly to the battery so that it stays on all the time, as this condition could completely drain the vehicle if it's parked for a long time. So we talked about this in my last video where we were hooking up to the heated gear connector, and I mentioned if you wired that to directly to the battery and you had something plugged into that USB adapter, it'd be charging all the time. So good thing to take note of. So they want us to note here that the security system enable the service mode before testing. So they want you to disconnect the siren. And I can tell you the reason they want you to do this is because you're basically going to be applying power to the bike and then removing power to the bike. And if you have your security system armed, the alarm will go off. That is the only reason that they want you to do this. I don't intend to do this. You have to dig that out to disconnect that siren. And frankly, for our test, we're kind of concerned if the security system is draining the battery or adding extra amperage to the draw. So we're going to leave it connected. So we'll verify that the ignition switch is in the off position and that all the lights and accessories off. We'll leave our security system connected and we'll remove the main fuse. So from there, they want us to note that we'll have an initial current draw that will occur directly after connecting the digital multimeter. This should drop to the value shown in Table 1 in less than 30 seconds. It also notes there's a higher than normal initial current draw. So Harley Davidson recommends setting your digital multimeter to amperage to protect the meter and then switch it to milliamps after the draw has dropped. So we'll try that. It may set the alarm off. We'll see. They then have you use the test connector kit. And in there, there's a connector to connect to the main fuse socket. And then you're going to use your meter to measure across that main fuse. So I am not going to purchase this kit. It comes with a lot of parts that frankly we don't need. Essentially what we're looking to do is take our multimeter and connect it between the two spades of the main fuse. So we're putting our meter in line with the power to the bike. Once you have that, they want you to observe the current reading. And then you're going to add the maximum draw values found in the table below for the components equipped on the vehicle being tested. If the reading observed on the multimeter is less than the sum of the maximum draw for the components, the draw is within spec. A higher meter reading indicates excessive current draw. So then you have to go locate which component or accessory is creating that draw on your bike. So they have you add all this stuff together if you have these things on your bike. Well, we have all of them. So if you add these together, you get 5.5 milliamps. They also note if the siren is there, if equipped, that can draw 20 milliamps. Now, we won't have the siren going off, hopefully, so I don't think we're going to see a 20 milliamp draw, but I guess we can take note of that. So let's go to the bike and see what we see. So with our key fob present, the battery tender disconnected, we're going to remove the cap for the main fuse, and then we're going to turn the ignition on. And then you can pull the main fuse at any point. The bike will go off. It's important to remember, turn your ignition back to the off position before proceeding with the test. So at this point, we're going to connect a lead to each spade of where the fuse connects. So I have these two leads here. It really does not matter which side is which. So we'll snap a lead on to the blade, being careful to not connect the two blades together, otherwise the bike will go on. So we've pinched one on, so we have the black. And now we'll pinch the red one on. Again, it does not matter what color goes on what side, but you don't want these two to touch each other. Okay, so now we have our two leads connected. We will connect them to our voltmeter. So we've moved our COM as ground, we've moved our positive over to 10 amp. And so we will connect one lead and then the other lead. Okay, we can let that dangle, but you don't want these touching any ground. A quick call out, you should always test your leads to make sure you don't have any resistance in them before you take your measurements. Otherwise it will throw everything off. So with it set to milliamps still, we'll set it to ohms, and then we'll take the tip of our two leads and touch them together. You can see we have 0. So there is no resistance in our leads, so we're good to go. You don't want anything more than 0.5 ohm. We're going to set our meter to measure amps. So we have amps down below. We'll start with 10. So we'll set it to 10 amps, which is currently showing nothing. And we will connect the other lead. So we have one lead connected. Now we'll connect the other lead and the bike should power on. All right, so the bike just powered on and the lights have flashed. And if we look, we can see we're reading about 1.6 amps, 1.72. We'll let it bounce around and settle down. 0.98, 0.99. And now you can see the bike has fallen asleep. So now we're registering 0 draw at 10 amps. Okay, so we have 0 amps at 10 amps after letting the bike sit. But what they suggest is you go back to milliamps. So we would move this connector over and measure milliamps. Because if we switch that here, we're still showing 0, 0. So we need to move this lead back over. Okay, so we moved our lead from the 10 amp to back to milliamps, and I set it to milliamps. And you can see we're measuring 1.5, it hops around, 1.6, 1.5, keeps hopping around, which would explain that relay connecting on the other side for the power lock. It just keeps hopping around. But we're just over 1.5 milliamps. So we will disconnect one of the leads. We'll disconnect the other lead, and we're now good to put the fuse back in. So remember, the ignition is off, so we'll take our 60 amp and put that back in. The lights are flashing, and the bike is clicked, and we're now back to normal. We have about 1.5 milliamps of draw. I will say when I did the test, I had the key fob present, because originally when I did the test, I had the key fob on the bench. And when I moved the lead on the meter from 10 amp back to milliamps, the alarm went off, right? Because we disconnected the power connection to the main fuse and then reconnected it, and the security system said something's up, so it set the alarm off, which is why Harley Davidson wants you to remove the security alarm for this test. I can tell you, to get the alarm to go off, you got to put the main fuse back in, bring your key fob over, and turn the ignition on. So be prepared for that. But when I did the test a second time, in what I showed in my video here, I had the key fob present. So it is possible having the key fob present added a little amperage draw to the bike, because the key fob is there and the system is sensing it, so maybe it added a few milliamps. But I'm going to go with 1.5 milliamps as our test result. So I am no mathematician. I'm actually pretty poor at math, but I did some Googling and I wanted to try to figure out, so with 1.5 milliamp draw, how long would the bike last, how long would the charge on the battery last before it went dead and you wouldn't be able to start the bike? So how long could it sit with no riding or no charging before it went dead? So if we take a look at it, 1.5 milliamps equals 0.0015 of an amp. And we assume that the Harley Davidson battery is a 20 amp battery. Now I must admit, I just did some Googling and the results kind of show that the Harley Davidson touring batteries are 20 amp hours, but that may be wrong. So you'll correct me if that's incorrect. So if I consider a 20-hour amp battery, meaning it can go 20 hours with a 1 amp draw, and we do that with our calculation of 20 amp hours divided by 0.0015, we get 13,333.3333 hours. If you divide that by 24 hours in a day, that's going to equal 555 days. So that bike could sit for a very long time before it wouldn't start. But hopefully when you're out in your travels, you won't be letting your bike sit that long. But I think you'll be great for an overnight or multiple nights, even visiting a family member somewhere, and your bike sits for a week. I think you're going to be good to go. So the ticking sound is annoying. And I really don't remember this on my 2018. It may have been there and I just didn't notice, or if I did notice it, I never looked into it. But now that I know it's there, it drives me nuts, right? Every time I'm working on the bike, I hear this ticking sound. And if you didn't know about it until this video, I'm sorry, because now you're probably going to notice it every time you're out with your bike. I did notice that if I put a little pressure on the relay, so if I just push down on the relay a little bit, it would remove a lot of that sound. So it's just giving a little pressure to that relay cover. So I do think you could put some tape on that to put a little pressure on your relays to help quiet it down a little bit. I also did some investigation. I looked into relays, that specific relay, to see if there was a quieter version. And I have not found one. I actually reached out to a relay company and they wrote back, no, there's no sound deadening option for that relay. So I think we're stuck with that ticking sound, unfortunately. You may try the tape trick and that may lower the volume a little bit. Your other option would be to pull those relays out and then just disable your lock and unlock option. But I find that a pretty neat feature of a CVO and I use it a lot. So I have no intent of removing those relays. A couple of quick additions here. Using a zip tie is way better than trying to tape that relay down. And it does make a difference. Just run that zip tie around it and put a little pressure on that relay, pulling it down, and it really quiets it down. So this is a great little tip to eliminate some of that noise. But don't over crank it. You don't want to break your relay or put a lot of unnecessary pressure on your relay. Also, there's a lot of ways to test parasitic draw. You can test across each fuse in your fuse box and then add all that together. So that will work. You'll touch your lead to each side of the fuse and then I'll add all that. The most common method is to disconnect the negative cable of the battery and then run your meter from the cable to the negative terminal on the battery and measure that way. But I caution you, many have found that if you don't pull the main fuse with these bikes, you will brick your BCM. And then you actually have to take it to the dealer for them to flash that BCM to get it back online. So I would follow Harley's instructions and put your meter in line at that main fuse. I really think that's the way to go here. The other last thing I'll remind you is I'm an enthusiast. I am not a professional at all. So if you try this with your bike, you're doing it at your own risk. But as we found, there's very little amperage draw here with this bike, and I'm pretty confident that my battery won't go dead when I go to Sturgis and let it sit overnight. So parasitic draw and ticking sounds, at least from the CVO models. I sure hope you found this information useful, and if you did, you'll go share it with someone else. But until next time, in the friction zone.